Okay, so today we are going to do a camera firmware upgrade on the H501A, and this comes with the new firmware that comes with the new compass. So for the 501A right now, you have a new compass, so you don't have to do the compass calibrations, but in order for that to work properly, you need these versions of firmware, 1146 and 1150. All the 501As that are being produced right now have the new camera firmware, and they have the new compass, and they have these firmware versions, so this does not apply to you. If you upgrade to the new compass, you're going to need to install these versions of firmware, and you want to install the camera firmware as well. If you have any versions under these, like 1141, you can still use this camera firmware. It will work. However, in the changelog, they do say, and I'll show you just so I can word it exactly how they explain it. They do say number 6, improve camera quality if installed with camera firmware version 1114. So part of the firmware change in this package here is better camera quality if using this firmware. So if you have 1141, if you have that package, I don't think you're going to see any real big change, any big difference. 1110 is the current version with that firmware, and it works very well. So with that, I would recommend just stay with it. So for this new versions of firmware with the new compass, this is the recommended camera firmware. So to install that, first thing we need to do is we need an SD card. And if you go to the camera firmware, you're going to see I created a document, and it's just a simple document that tells you what you need to do. So you need a class 10 or above micro SD card only, preferably SanDisk. That is something Hubsan said. I have used a different brand and it worked fine. You want to format it FAT32, and then the rest I'll show you. But this is something you can read when you download the firmware from the Hubsan website. So I will show you the rest of that. But right now we're going to format the card. So it's in my USB drive E. Right click it, click format, and it's FAT32. Click start, and it's going to warn me that it's going to erase all data. Click OK, and it's done. So now that disk is formatted. Now that the disk is formatted, what we want to do is we want to put the camera firmware on that disk. Now this is where you have to pay attention. You don't want to put this file on that disk. You want to open this file, and you want to put this file on that disk. It will not work unless you have this file on there. You don't want to have anything else on the disk, only this file. A lot of people make the mistake and they put this file on the disk. It won't update. The other mistake they make is they open this and then they copy and paste these and put them on the disk. It won't work that way either. The only way it'll work is if you copy this folder right here. So we're going to copy this folder, and then we're going to open up E and paste. So now we have the firmware update on our micro SD card for the H501A. So from here, we're going to go and do the actual install on the H501A quad. Okay, so now we have the firmware update for the H501A camera loaded on our SD card. That is the only thing we have on there, nothing else. So before we install it, I just want to show you the difference of how to start the quad up, what the quad looks like when it starts up without the SD card in it, and then when we're doing the actual install. So Set that aside. We're going to flip it upside down so you can see the lights. The light is what you're going to pay attention to when you're doing this update. It's nothing like any other firmware update you do on these quads. So we're going to plug in the battery. And when we do, you're going to see the blue light comes on, turns off, and then it stays off. Okay, that's your normal startup. So now we're going to put the SD card in and do our update. So we want to turn the quad off, and we're going to load the micro SD card. Put it in there, snap it in place. Now we're going to power it up, and you'll see a difference with the lights. Now first, I just want to make it clear, yours might not do it exactly the way mine does it. Some light up longer, some light up 2 or 3, 4 times, some only light up 2 times. As long as it lights up, goes out, and stays out. So I'll show you. We're gonna plug it in. Blue light is on. Blue light's off, back on. Remember, we want it to turn off. Right now it's installing the firmware as long as that light turns on. Sometimes it takes a while, sometimes it does it fast. Okay, so now it's turned back off and turned back on again. And remember, yours might not do it this many times. Some load faster, some load slower. Not every quad is the same. Even though it's the same model, doesn't mean it's going to load exactly the same. The key here is you want to make sure that light turns off and stays off. That will tell you the firmware update is done. So when it turns off, I always wait just a little bit longer to make sure. In this case, we can tell it's done. It has not turned back on. So our firmware has installed successfully. That's the only way you're going to know that you did a successful update, other than looking at the screen on your controller. If you have nothing there, then you did not do this update correctly. So now let's look at the controller. You're not going to see a difference, but you always want to make sure that everything went right. So first thing you want to do, very important, take the disc out. Take the disc out, erase the contents. Don't keep them on here, because if you go and put this in your SS, then you're in trouble. You're gonna mess up the camera firmware in that quad. So delete the contents. Only keep it on your computer. So we have it out. We're going to plug it in. Turn on the transmitter. Okay, so on the transmitter, what we need to do is go into the menu. Left stick down, press and hold enter, and then we're going to go look at the versions. And if you see here, it doesn't say anything about camera firmware. So there is no way to tell what firmware version you have. The only way to tell is when you install it yourself. So again, if your quad comes already with a new compass and these versions, then you already have this camera firmware and do not need to do the upgrade. If you install the new compass and then install this firmware that has to be installed with it, then you can upgrade to this camera firmware and do it exactly the way I showed you, and it won't be a problem. It's very, like I said before, it is very easy to do, but it's just as easy to mess it up. The good thing is it's not a hard fix if you do mess it up. So if you take the SS firmware and you install it on the camera board, it's going to act like it's bricked. The camera will not work. You will not get any FPV. Your screen will be blank, and you're going to have to take the correct firmware and upgrade back onto this quad, and sometimes it can take several attempts. So you want to do it right. You want to make sure you're using the right file, and you want to follow this video and the documentation that I provide for you inside the firmware files. Alright, that's how you upgrade the camera firmware on the H501A, and it is version number 1114. It's one of 3 versions. Your first version was 111, then you had 1110, and now you have 1114. Thank you for watching, and thank you for subscribing. If you do not subscribe, please do for future content. Thank you.